Thank you for inviting me to give a keynote address. I don't know how I can follow Lynn's act with any amount of comparability, but I'll try. I passed out handouts of the slides so that you wouldn't be straining here and you can just relax. Be comfortable. We have an hour, so you might as well be comfortable. And I'm going to begin with a nostalgic look at the past, as Lynn did. I think we're on the same wavelength when we, My involvement in ACT is a product of some coincidence. When I was a young associate professor contemplating my first sabbatical, I wanted to go to a university that had a very good stats grad program so that I could retool. I teach graduate stats, but I wanted to retool after my, graduate school 7 years earlier. So I was planning to go to the University of Wisconsin. I had contacts there. However, I happened to be talking that week to a colleague of mine from the University of Waterloo, Alf Hunter, who was a Wisconsin PhD and in quantitative methods. I used to cover off his course sometime at Waterloo. And he said, why don't you go down to the University of North Carolina? He said, Dave Heiss is there, and Dave Heiss has been a former teacher of Alf Hunter. So later that day, I was shoveling snow at home, and I was started to think about what he said. And I said, God bless me, something like that. Well, how nice it would be to get away from the Canadian winter for a little while. So I contacted UNC, and in short order, I was invited to go there with the totally undeserved title of visiting scholar. That's when, so I flew down to UNC early in the summer of 1978 to meet with Dave Heiss. I set up a meeting and to find accommodations for my young family. And when I met with Dave, he told me about affect control theory, about which I knew nothing, because it was inchoate at the time. And it was just getting off the ground. And he took me to a computing room, and he did a one-event simulation. Now look at what's going on today. I mean, it's like a different world, right? Well, he showed me a one-event simulation on a remote terminal to a mainframe computer. And it was something like a bully. What would a bully do to something else? And hit comes up and things like. I was so impressed because I had done my PhD dissertation in role analysis, which is very close to what he was working on. But I didn't go there for that reason. I wanted to methodologically keep up with things. And he invited me to participate in the UNC 78 project, which was just being completed by Lynn. In fact, I think you were somewhat rubbed it in a little bit that it's nice of you to show up and you've done all the work. So.
If I can interject, it's one of those great things about how intellectually generous Heiss was.
I know.
Neil showed up just as the data had finished being cleaned and
Planned it
ever. And Dave just said, Neil, great, welcome to the family. And at the time I thought, this is really a good idea. But it was a wonderful idea, because look what Neil has done for the program.
Anyway, it was kind of coincidental and funny. And Dave told me about the terrific graduate students, he had working on this project. And when I went down later in August and met them, and he particularly bragged about Lynn Smith-Loven. And when I went down in August, for the sabbatical, and met Lynn, I saw what Dave was talking about. He said that she was head and shoulders above all other graduate students with whom he was working. And when I met Lynn, I took that both figuratively and literally. Sorry, Lynn, the devil made me say that. Anyway, it did not take much work for me to get up to speed on ACT, because prior to 1978 there were only a handful of publications. I think you all know them, so I can be fast. This included the work of Osgood and Associates. They were from my alma mater. I remember I had in my PhD program, I took a minor in psychometrics from Illinois, and I remember the stacks of EPA cabinets around there, and Cattell was working as well. But there was Osgood's work. Gollop on impression formation, and of course Powers on the control of perception, all of which were foundational for ACT. Now, up to 1970, Dave had published only 4 articles, 2 of which dealt with semantic differential measurement per se, and only 2 with the dynamics of impression formation. Right? Things began to perk up, however, with publication of the important behavioral science article in 1977 entitled Social Action as the Control of Affect. The Interact Manual in 1978, which was published locally by the Survey Research Center at UNC, and of course the Understanding Events book in 1979, which I had the privilege of reading in manuscript form and providing my comments. I'm sure Lynn did too. And Lynn's SPQ article on behavior settings and impression formation in 1979. So that was it. Just a few articles. I don't know if I'm missing anything, but... So these important publications marked the beginning of the maturation of ACT into a vibrant coalescent theory and program of research. At the 25th anniversary of the annual Conference of Theory and Research and Group Processes, I co-presented a paper with Don Robinson summarizing ACT research from 1988 until 2013. This was published in 2014. Our review of the literature netted over 120 articles and chapters and 4 major books, as well as a great deal of cross-cultural research, including European, Asian, Middle Asian cultures. We also pointed out how the continual engagement of ACT with methodological and technological advances raised new questions, prompting researchers to revisit core assumptions of the theory. In this regard, we singled out hierarchical linear modeling applied to nested equation data, which enable estimation of impression formation equations for individuals. And this, of course, I can skip over this because you've taken a lot of, fortunately, given me more time by talking about things this morning. We also singled out Bayes' Act as a transformative advance of ACT. And I mean that sincerely, really, for Bayes' Act via Tobias and Jesse Hoey has really been transformative, I believe, of ACT. So enabling us to deal with the uncertainty, fluctuation in learning, of identity, meanings, and social interaction. You know all this. Now, a note on my presentation. To gather material for my keynote address, you'll remember I sent out an ACT listserv request for submissions. And so my talk today is based almost entirely on submissions that I received. So it may leave some things out, and also I included, if in the submissions the Dartmouth paper was included, I said something about it in my summary. If it wasn't, I didn't. So I'd have to update this based on papers today. I structure my review around 3 main headings. Theoretical development, I'll just go over them here. Theoretical developments and expansions, including cognition affect, which is a favorite topic of mine, self, which is equally a favorite topic, and so on, artificial intelligence, and you can read as well as I. Methodological advances, okay, Bayes' Act, impression formation equations, the work of Don and Lynn, and of course, I don't want to leave anybody out here, but those papers will be mentioned, Rogers et al. and miscellaneous innovations and tools, and finally substantive applications. I'll deal with each of these in turns, and I'll list some papers under each and say a few words about it. You know, my talk is supposed to be a survey, and that's what it's going to be. On cognition and affect, let me go one ahead. Now, I'm going to make a general comment first. I said that was a favorite topic of mine because I think it's foundational to the distinctiveness of affect control theory as a social psychological theory, distinct from other identity theories and from non-identity theories in social psychology. I think it's very important. So a comment. I devoted almost an entire chapter to the relation between cognition and affect in my 1994 book, and the distinction between self-conceptions, cognitive, and self-sentiments, affective, is a major theme of my 2010 book with Dave Heiss. Also my 2015 book on self-sentiments. In the 94 book, I proposed two principles to describe the relation between cognition and affect. First, the principle of inextricability proposes that cognition and affect are not mutually exclusive modes of consciousness. Okay? They're not mutually exclusive in an absolute sense. And the principle of complementarity, and that's kind of borrowed from Niels Bohr, the physicist, and William James, the psychologist, you know, who independently talked about that. Complementarity proposes that where the distinction becomes analytically and empirically defensible, cognition and affect can be treated as complementary manifestations of that phenomenological experience we call mind or consciousness. You know, so well, I'll get to this in a moment. These two principles are not contradictory because inextricability is an ontological principle, a statement about reality, you know, whereas complementarity is an epistemological principle, a statement about how we get to know that reality. Okay? Now, I'll return to that in the conclusion of the paper too, because of advances in neuroscience and cognitive science that challenges whether there's any distinction between cognition and affect. So I'm going to roll back to that in the conclusion. Now, this distinction continues to operate as an important underlying principle or theme of work in ACT. For example, the papers I'm going to bring up, I've brought up already here, that distinction underlies the Francis and Adams paper for sure. You know, if you're comparing ACT with the identity theories of Burke and Stryker and so on. And obviously, you know, my paper with Jesse Hoey comes out of that distinction. That's an underlying. And the papers by Kelly, the papers which emphasize the importance of institutional sensibility, which is a cognitive kind of thing, right? So that distinction seems to always be there. It's an important underlying distinction of all our work. And the somatic transform function, which we pulled into that paper, Hoey and MacKinnon in 2016. We gave this paper at the October Identity Theory Conference in Kent State University, and we actually got out of there unscathed. We slipped out after midnight, and no one was looking. Basically, it's we've always, I think everybody would agree, I mean, this is back to Osgood and basic ACT, that going the other way, denotative cognitive meaning evokes affective associations or connotative affective meaning, right? No problem. And the other, going in the other direction, connotative affective meaning, you know, evaluation, potency, activity, ratings, for instance, is a portal into the complexity and hyperdimensionality of cognition, you know, right? And thanks to Jesse's genius in this, out of our discussions, he comes up with why not a somatic transform to mathematize what I was saying verbally, you know? And so I'll attribute that to Jesse. So
You'll hear more about that.
yes, and that's why I'm able to save time. I know you're doing this. Same as save time by what I heard this morning. So you're going to hear more about this, but it's I think it's really interesting to operationalize what I've been trying to say verbally for many years. Now, the papers, just a minute, let me go back here. I have so much here that okay. I've summarized pretty much the papers, except for the Kelly papers, I'm sorry. This study, looking at the, back here, sorry about that. Yeah, I want to say a word or two about the Kelly papers. I mean, it's pretty well, I've put a little summary sentence or phrase under each, but I have at least a paragraph written up on every paper that was sent to me, sometimes a page, So bear with me, I'll cherry pick a few points for each. Drawn from our MA thesis, this is Kelly 2016 and 2017, examines the predictive effect of deflection on likelihood, perception, and by controlling for the institutional sensibility of events. Okay, so she's looking at deflection controlling for institutional sensibility. Now, if you remember from earlier today, and I didn't make the point myself, we always used institutional context as a way to code out nonsensible kinds of things. It was mentioned several times today, right? And what Chelsea is proposing, along with her co-authors, is that we incorporate this explicitly into affect control theory equations, right? So have I pretty well hit the nail on the head there? Trying to save time, because if you look at the number of slides in that handout I gave you, we'll be here till dinner time if I don't. I've actually timed it, and it's under an hour. If I stick to my cutting things out. Anyway, even controlling for institutional sensibility supported the inverse relation between deflection and event likelihood assumed by ACT. Now that goes back to a paper Heiss and I did for that 88 book on event likelihood. Now, the Dartmouth conference paper, you're going to be dealing with that, so I'm not going to take the wind out of your sails, even though I've got your submission on that. Just to say that you examine the relative power of the two mechanisms of deflection on the one hand and institutional sensibility on the other in predicting event likelihood. Is that enough? You can fill in. Okay. I've got your methods here, and I won't go into that. I'm not even going to go into your findings from that linear mixed model analysis. Then your Kelly, Robinson, and Smith-Lovan 2017, this is going to, I'm looking forward to, this is going to be presented in ASA in Montreal. Employing a nationally representative sample, you expand this expands Kelly's, I'm sorry to be using your last name, Chelsea's earlier work. Moore and Rogelin, 2016. A comparison of ACT with status characteristics theory. Let's go ahead here. Okay, I'll stay here for a moment. Identifying contradictory predictions and proposing a theoretical framework for reconciling these differences. They identify 3 points of convergence, in each case identifying which theory makes stronger predictions of interaction outcomes. So again, this is the kind of work I like to see, is the expansion of ACT to make connections with other social psych theories. This is great stuff, I wish I were back in grad school again. Now, self. Just a second there. Another comment, because it's a favorite topic of mine. Although the concept of self was frequently invoked by ACT, as a higher level referent of the theory, okay? Strictly speaking, ACT is a theory of identity processes, like an identity or a few identities at a time, comparable to the work of Stryker, McCall and Simmons, and Burke. These kinds of identity theories, strictly speaking. So we always had self lurking in the background as an ultimate referent of what we were doing at the level of identity processes. Okay. It was not until publication of the MacKinnon and I meant to say my book with Dave, only somebody with a narcissistic personality disorder, fill in the blank, politically, today, speaks of himself in the third person. Right? I don't have to say whom. I may not get back into the States next time across the border. It was not until the publication of my 2010 book with Dave that the affect control principle was applied explicitly to the level of the self. A higher order control system governing identity processes that has become known thanks to the Georgia cohort under Don became known as ACT-self, right? And that comes out of that 2010? No. Yeah, it was around there, wasn't it? Yeah, 2010 conference we had. Yeah. Now, looking at some of the publications, Hoey and Schroeder introduced the Bayesian version of ACT self. I think this is really a terrific contribution. They did it in the context of socio-effectively skilled artificial agents, but we won't hold that against them. Sorry, Jesse. According to ACT, situational identities govern, individual actions. Like if you select behaviors to confirm an identity, but according to ACT self, you select identities to confirm your self-sentiments, right? So it's that higher order. Okay. In the Bayesian version of ACT self, developed by Hoey and Tobias Schroeder, the self is represented as you know, as a probability distribution, allowing it to be multimodal. A person can maintain multiple different identities, simultaneous identities, something that has been a topic of Lynn's for some time. Uncertainty, a person can be unsure who they really are, and learnable. Agents can learn the identities and selves of other agents. The paper shows how the Bayesian version of ACT self can serve as a model for representing artificial intelligence which are socially competent or intelligent. Okay. Now, this is my 2015 book. Okay, so I think most of you are familiar with. It expands I'll get away from here for a moment. It's an expansion of our 2010 book. I take the 2010 book, two major themes there. One is institutions, the other is self. Dave has taken the work on institutions and run with that. I took the work on self and I've run with that, and that culminated in that 2015 book, we proposed this three-dimensional construct of self, and what I did was I'd always worked in this area of self-esteem anyway. I went through the literature on self-esteem and brought all that into the picture, also on self-efficacy and so on, and made an argument for evaluation, potency, activity measurement of self-sentiment, and the expansion beyond the evaluation dimension to potency, which was done to some extent with self-efficacy theory, but also one step further into activation, you know. So that's that book. Boyle, forthcoming in sociological form. I'm really proud of this article, Caitlin. Why? Because it empirically tests and verifies our theory of self. So that's, well, I wish I'd had that data and done it myself. So I'm very proud of that paper. So she's shown in this paper, we seek to confirm and maintain self-sentiment via identity selection, which is just what I said. I'll skip over the detail. Harkness, Kroska, and Pescasolito in 2016, Advances in Medical Social. I'm putting that down below under substantive areas, so we'll save time. I've cross-referenced things because I didn't forewarn you in terms of trying to save time, but some papers and some research falls under different categories, and I don't want you to be blaming me for putting it in the wrong category, so I put it in all of them, but I'll only describe it in one. Okay. Now, okay, self. Got that one. Okay. Now, I'm missing something here. Just give me a second. Okay. The following 4 papers propose that submission. This is Andreas Schneider's work with some of his students. That submission creates specific affective patterns and self-concepts. So are you doing anything on this? Yes, you are, because I saw it on the... Yeah, I know you are. That's right, because I saw it in the program. I shouldn't have even asked. So I made a note here. I don't have to say anything further on that because Andreas is going to do it. So your 4 papers propose a submission, has effects on self-concept. And, sorry, back here. The following 3 papers deal with the loss of identities and the persistence of a sense of self in people with Alzheimer's disease. Now, that's about all I'm going to say on this, because I think that's going to be covered to some extent in what other people are doing as well. Yeah, okay. There's enough material here to choke a horse. Okay, let's go ahead here. Social institutions and social order. As I said, that as with the concept of self, the concept of social institutions lurked in the background of ACT, and we invoked it instrumentally as cognitive filters. I think, Andreas, you worked on that with Dave at one time, didn't you? The cognitive filter stuff? Yeah. To block out simulation retrievals that didn't make any cognitive sense. And just as the original version of ACT was not an explicit theory of self, neither was it a theory of social institutions. And the book I did with Dave proposed an explicit theory of social institutions, which Lynn touched on today, based on the semantic structure of linguistic categories of identities, principal components, analysis of identities, and collocates of identities, and so on. Heist 2016. This is unpublished. I've read the manuscript, and I've encouraged them to try to publish it as a monograph. In a nutshell, since it's not described here, in a nutshell, whether one did a principal component analysis of the meanings of identity words, collocates of identities, or a separate study of word associations, we get the same number and cluster of institutions popping up. So it's really a cross-validation, cross methods. Heiss, MacKinnon, and Scholl. This is a chapter we did in the Lawler and Thai order on the edge of chaos. And in a nutshell, surprise, surprise, we locate social order in the affective meanings of things, in the expressive order. And as I say, the affective micro-level explanations of social order based on social institutions. I can skip that. Now, Kelly, these papers here, these 3 papers here, yeah, okay. I described these already under cognition and affect, so I don't have to say anything more about that. Cannon, Kelly, and Robinson. This is going to be presented at the Dartmouth conference, right? So, there he is, okay. That's what was submitted to me. And it's a cross-cultural study of deflection by social institutions in the U.S. and Egypt. I have a little detail on this, but I'm not going to take the wind out of your sail. You people have been so good to me because I had wondered how, in the name of whatever, I'm going to get through all this. But just on the basis of what you did this morning, it saved me a lot of time. And what I can anticipate for the rest of the conference, having read the program. I had this prepared before I saw the final program. Now, artificial intelligence. Now, Jesse and his students at Waterloo have been just prolific in the number of papers that come out. I find it embarrassingly productive. I wish I were half as productive. In any case, it's pretty self-descriptive here. This paper here was very important, the 2016 one. Not that they're not all important, Jesse, but this one was one of the key papers. Took me 2 days to read and 2 weeks to understand. As I pored over that, and sometimes you have to leapfrog over some of the mathematical details because sometimes we're not obviously as well trained, in that area. But it made perfect sense. And then I won't jump to the other paper right now. I will be dealing with the ASR paper shortly, but in another context, okay, under Bayes Act. Francis, let me see here. Adams, Kennick, Francis, there's this whole set of papers dealing with the loss of identities and the persistence. I listed that above under the section on self. The following 5 papers deal with affectively aligned assistive technologies, and I think what I presented there will give you enough of an idea of what's going on, right? I don't have time to add any detail. That's what it comes down to. Basically, it's using adding affect into what used to be primarily cognitive models for building affective sensibility into cognitively driven models of assistive technologies that don't work very well. Is that a good summary? Okay. Thanks for pointing me in that direction because I'm trying to condense things, as best I can. Physical environment and technology. This is the work of Lolem and Shank. And I wrote here that in view of what was done today, I don't have to say very much. I have a paragraph written on each of these papers. And Rowan's talking about the other one. And that's right. So there's the papers. I'm giving you a review, right? A thumbnail sketch. I can't possibly say more than a few sentences about each paper, if you want to have your dinner tonight, as I say. So bear with me with my cutting things. So I'm not going to say any more about that because there's 2 presentations this morning and you've got another, don't you? In the program? Okay. Yes, yeah. Okay, so that takes care of that. I wish I could have written it this fast. That took a long time to get all that together. Methodological advances, that's the second major heading in my talk today. We've gone over some theoretical advances and expansions into other areas, such as technology and consumer products and that. Now methodological advances. I said at the beginning of my talk that there were 2 major methodological advances in the last number of years. One was the work of Don and Lynn on impression formation, and Rogers and your colleagues too, and so on. And the other is Bayes Act, and I think both have been quite transformative of ACT. Instead of our remaining, I guess, horizontally non-productive, I was going to say productive, but that's a contradiction in terms. These advances have been transformative, and much more realistic with the nuances and the rapidity of social interaction and thoughts and emotions and the whole thing. So anyway, Bayes Act version 2, a major advance over the original version, employing that semantic transform I had up earlier. Okay, but it employs that for all connections between denotative, cognitive, and connotative affective meanings. Now, Jesse sent out a statement on this with ACT Listserv.
No, it hasn't gone out yet, no.
No, but...
We have to talk about it.
Oh, you sent... I received something from you on it.
I think we have it, but it hasn't gone out.
Oh, it hasn't gone on the listserv. Okay. So, you're going to be talking further...
Yeah, I'll go over it.
I have a complete description of it here, which I will now put aside and let you talk about that tomorrow. This is fun. Being able to, put off the work to other. So I'll skip the detail on that. Now, are you saying anything about the practical implications of Bayes Act? I should look at the program again. Your Themis COG and Aspire projects?
Tobias will.
Pardon?
Tobias will.
Tobias will. Oh, he's coming. He's on
He's
computer.
recorded a
He's
keynote
online
for us.
right now listening to you.
Is he?
So you can say hi to him.
Hi, Tobias. But Tobias will be saying, you will be saying, Tobias, this has been promised.
He says hi back.
As it includes, what I wanted to say is a few words about the application of Bayes Act. Now, Jesse has applied it extensively in the area of artificial intelligence and artificially intelligent, assistance to elderly and demented patients and those with physical handicaps and so on and so forth. But now he's applied it to online open source development platforms such as GitHub. And there's 2 major projects there, the Themis COG project and the Aspire project. I have a little written up on each. I'm just not going to say anything because Tobias, I trust you will do this tomorrow, isn't he?
We'll talk about Themis, yeah.
Okay.
Themis is basically a grant project we're getting ready to do that looks into self-organized collaborations and online software development platforms like GitHub.
Good. You read it right off of my description. No, I'll skip that because that's all you have to know until Tobias speaks. So moving on. I already talked about the paper with Jesse in 2016, and the third paper on this slide, Hoey and Schroeder, introduced the Bayesian version of ACT Self, and I talked about that earlier under self. This was already listed under artificial intelligence, Hoey Schroeder and Alta Holly, 2016. That's that paper introduced Bayes-Act to artificial intelligence audience. Now, Schroeder, Hoey, and Rogers, 2016. This ASR paper I'm going to say something about, okay? This award-winning article, congratulations, there's awards all over the place now, introduces the theory to a sociological audience as opposed to an artificial intelligence computing science audience, showing how Bayes-Act accounts for the dynamic fluctuation of identity meanings for self and other during social interaction, explaining how interactants learn and adjust meanings through social experience, and illustrating how stable patterns of social interaction can emerge from uncertain perceptions of identities. Simulations illustrate how this Bayesian version of ACT balances cultural consensus with individual differences in meaning, balances the verification of meaning with subtle learning processes reflecting change, and accounts for noise in communicating situational identities. This article also discusses how Bayes-Act addresses debates about core features of the self, viewed as stable and yet malleable, coherent and yet comprised of multiple identities, with often competing meanings. In addition, it addresses the implications of Bayes-Act for computational models of social behavior and artificial intelligence in the conclusion of the paper. Now, that paper is so much easier to get through than the one you wrote for the artificial intelligence computing science, you know. That was a great paper. So congratulations to the authors, for Kim and Hoey Tobias, on this paper. That's a real advance for ACT to get that out in ASR. So I was pleased with that. Now the next paper, Agar and Hoey, focuses, I'm just going to say no more than what's up here. It focuses on the planning aspect of Bayes-Act. The papers with Jesse and Young focus on applying Bayes-Act to the prisoner's dilemma situation. Enough said. Okay, do you want?
Yeah, Josh will talk about that more.
Yes, that's right. I saw it on the program. Yeah, I meant to add that. Thanks. Impression formation equations is the second major methodological advance. Advances in this area by Lynn, Don, Morgan, Rogers, and who. This social psychology quarterly paper is very important. Now, I made a note at noon hour, skipped this entire program. The authors already did this in the morning. So thank you again. So I don't have to really say anything more about that, except that I took the Canadian equations after reading that paper, and I analyzed the Canadian equations for three kinds of metric with my data. Derived metric, that's the successive intervals, rescaling of our original EPA data. What? Yeah, I did that. Also the assumed metric, which we later moved to. I just use the assumed metric now. And I've always been concerned about the problem of multiclinearity, as a statistics instructor, because of cross products. When you form two- and three-way interactions, they're obviously interaction terms are going to be correlated with their components. I've always been concerned about that, and of course in the literature the way recommended is to center your variables, right? So I thought I was being really smart, and I had done this anyway, so I reanalyzed the Canadian equations in light of the paper by Morgan, Rogers, and Hugh that was discussed this morning. Now, for all three kinds of data, and here's what I found. Just using simultaneous as opposed to stepwise regression, simultaneous OLS regression, in all three cases for each kind of metric. I found little practical difference in the magnitude and significance of effects across the three metrics of the EPA data. Practically nothing. Found nothing. Of particular interest, centering variables appears to make little or no difference in the number of significant terms identified. So I was wrong there. I thought it would solve. I'd get or simpler models and get rid of collinearity and so on. Didn't work. And regardless of metric, the analysis found all the stability and behavior effects identified by Morgan et al. Okay, but only some of their other categories of effects. The ones that, let's say, are more novel to your paper than the traditional ones, your other categories. In addition, I found many other categories of effects in the Canadian equations not identified by you guys. I sent you that, remember? I don't know, we never got to discuss it, but maybe we should while we're here. See what I can learn from it. Then we have the Smith, Loven, and Robinson final report, the Office of Naval Research, comparing cultural sentiments and impression formation equations across U.S. and Arabic-speaking cultures. Enough was said on that today. I don't have to say anything more. Miscellaneous innovations and tools, Francis and Lively. This is going to be presented at the Dartmouth conference. Yeah. So you're going to be talking about coding and analytic schemes for. It was submitted to me, so it's included here. So, but I won't anticipate, even though I have some written up, I won't say any more. Now, the Lolum, Thurgood, and Shank paper falls under this category, but we already talked about that under environment and physical environment and technology. The Morgan, Rogers, and Hugh paper, the earlier talk today by Professor Morgan there. Who, I'm always anticipatory. Proposed a Bayesian type, method for model specifications and of impression formation equations. So I won't say anything more on that. Now this next paper, oh God, Schroeder, Kajik, Stewart, and Thagard under review. I'm really impressed with this paper, although Tobias, I hope you don't mind if you're listening, my disclosing this, it didn't get accepted to the journal you sent it. But this neuro-computational model of emotions based on the semantic pointers. And this is just, I described that below under the emotions heading, so maybe I'll wait till I get there. Just pardon me. Okay. Schuster and Campos Castilla. This Social Psych Quarterly, where they use ACT based innovations for quantitative analysis of qualitative data. I list that under gender ideology and social movements, and I have a description under that category below, so I'll skip it here, and if I have time I'll talk more about it there. The following three papers involve visual analysis and exhibitions. That's pretty self-explanatory, very visual, Andreas. This documentary with the National Geographic Channel, have anyone seen that? That's out? That's been out, right? Pardon? Yeah, there you go. It's narrated by Morgan Freeman, so it's going to bring ACT, or some of it, into the. Okay, and moving on. Okay, I'm out of order here. Just a minute. Substantive applications. I want to allow 5 minutes for my concluding remarks. On cross-cultural research. The MacKinnon et al. Paper is going to present it here, so I won't say anything. I'm running out of time. Hitlin and Harkness I describe below under emotions. I think that's a very important book. I know neither person is here. Sarah Harkness is not here, is she? No. And Smith, Lowe, and Robinson, 2015, the final report. Enough was said about that today, and so I won't say anything more. But it falls under cross-cultural research. It's cross-reference. Emotions. The first paper is self-explanatory. I don't have time to go into any detail. The second, by Harkness et al., I describe that below under medical, social, mental health. The Hitlin and Harkness book also, but it fits under emotions. Rogers, Schroeder, and Van Schieff, Emotion Review. There's actually two papers here. The one you wrote with a target, it was a target article for a commentary. Are you saying anything further about that at the conference?
I'm not.
Okay, well, it's a multi-level model of emotions based on ACT. Would you like to add to that, or?
Only that the other work by Tobias that's going to be under review again soon. Probably.
Oh, the poem, yeah. They fit together.
It builds on this, basically the whole neural networks and semantic pointers hypothesis is introduced.
Yeah. Yeah, I made that connection, and they do fit well together, so thanks for emphasizing that. And then the Rogers et al. Paper 2014b is a reply to the invited comments. I won't say anything more on that. I already discussed the next paper under work and occupations. The ISR paper Andreas gave in Geneva, based on that submission hypothesis and aesthetic experience, that ties into emotions. And I already dealt with, I have more to say on this. I mentioned it, that the POEM model, the multi-level model integrating neural, cognitive, and social levels of explanation. And I have a whole paragraph written on that, which I will not read. I'm just going to have to move on and get to my conclusion. You have the rest of the slides. Okay? The work of the Ambrosat papers, multi-authored in some cases. There's enough of a description there, and I think you're familiar with a lot of them anyway, aren't you? The Ambrosat papers on habitats and on, culture and cognition and so on. Okay. Occupations and work. We'll recognize these papers. I'll go through the slides quickly, just to recognize these authors. Kraska and Kasson. And Schneider's paper with Moran was also listed under self. Politics, and Ambrosat has a single paper there. Gender ideology and subcultures. I just don't have time, it's 25 after, to say anything more on these papers. You have a copy to take home with you of the slides, and you can go online and read more. And it might very well turn out that my summaries of these I'll integrate into a published review anyway. We'll see. Are you doing something on the Dartmouth proceedings? No? Okay. Deviance and Crim. Boyle's co-authored. Boyle, and Boyle. Sounds like a law firm here. These papers deal essentially with the same theme from different perspectives, but the impact of sexual assault on mental health and how to avoid some of the negative consequences through re-identification processes, as a survivor rather than a victim. and so on. And the papers, I'm sorry, Amy, I won't be able to say anything else about this, but some of them are published. And in this Kroskin-Schmidt paper, you manipulated occupational status as well as criminal behavior on the sentencing, and essentially a replication of the work of Sudas with Lynn and Don, right? Yeah, if I'm right. And more Oglen and Cannon on masculinity, hypermasculinity identities. Zhao and Rogelin, emotion display on sentencing by gender of perpetrator. I did that under emotions. Finally, mental health. I'll just skip through this. I'll go back to that one, say one word. Finally, the following three papers deal with the loss of identities, persistence of self in people with Alzheimer's disease. That was dealt with under the section on self, but essentially it is that what demented and Alzheimer patients, what accounts for any sense of stability of self tends to be the self-sentiment as opposed to the persona, the cognitive aspect of self, consisting of all the identities a person had in the past, because sometimes they're trying to implement identities that are inappropriate for a therapeutic institution, right? Or they forget, they know that they feel that they've been good persons or powerful persons, but they may forget that they've been a lawyer or a mother or you know what I'm saying? So the point is that what may account for the stability of self across or in the era of dementia and Alzheimer's, which I hope we'll all avoid, is one's self-sentiment. That carries over apparently to some extent. Then of course you lose everything, but before that you at least have that. Now we started a couple of minutes late. May I say something about reductionism, Ken? Do I have 2 minutes? Okay. So in conclusion, the quantity and quality of work that I had the pleasure of reviewing is outstanding, and it augurs well for the future of ACT and Bayes Act research. While I believe that applying Thomas Kuhn's structure of scientific revolutions terms, I think we're in a period we've been in a long period of what he calls normal science. Are you familiar with Thomas Kuhn's work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions? We've been in a period of normal science until the work, the transformative kind of work I'm talking about by the people working in the impression formation area and the people working with Jesse and others on Bayes Act. I think this has made our normal science period, has enabled us to break out of it. It's become transformative work, in my humble opinion. I don't think we're at a point of scientific revolution where ACT is going to be replaced by an entirely new theory, but rather an evolutionary, transitional, transformative period. Now, that's my own take on it. You're free to disagree. Except don't talk to me if you do. No. Sorry about that. Now, I'll conclude about what I see as the challenges affecting ACT. And I'm just going to summarize this. I'm not going to read it. I think one challenge is the specter of reductionism. Now, there are three basic kinds. Well, there's all kinds of reduction. There's epistemological, ontological. You get into that stuff. But for me, there's three basic kinds. There's the downward reductionism with which we're all familiar, exemplified by those who try to reduce social psychology to individual psychology, if you know what I'm talking about, or in turn individual psychology to cognitive science and neuroscience, to hardwired patterns in the brain or to anatomical locations in the brain, So psychology itself faces a challenge of reductionism. Then there's well, let me say how ACT has been immunized, I think, against that downward reductionism. In the 94 book, I argued that since it incorporates what is equivalent to Mead's Act as its basic unit of analysis, which we operationalize as ABO, right? We built context, social context into our theory. So I think, along with the fact also that cultural sentiments, the language, like Mead, mind and self is based on language, the acquisition of language. For George Herbert Mead, mind develops and self develops with the acquisition of language. And of course, ACT is based on the affective associations of language, which is a cultural thing. So we have a social act and cultural sentiments, and that immunizes us, I think, to a great extent against downward reductionism. What about upward reductionism? I have only 2 more reductionisms to go. Upward reductionism, we covered that in my 2010 book with Dave, where upward reductionism is the reductionism upward of, let's say, social psychology to historical forces, to culture, to language, as the postmodernists tried to do, So I think we covered that there, so I'll dispense with that. Finally, there's what I like to call horizontal reductionism, okay? And this is the reduction of one mode of consciousness, for example, to another mode of consciousness. The reduction of affect to cognition. As some neuroscientists and cognitive scientists argue, there's no distinction between cognition and affect, And this is, of course, I think, how will I put it this way? However, I've been reading up a lot of neuroscience in the last year or so. The brain, to use a term by Barrett and Duncan and Barrett, the brain does not respect the distinction between cognition and affect, and that's what the neuroscientists argue. So therefore there's no distinction, but that to me is a non sequitur, because phenomenologically we experience the distinction. Even though it's spread out neurologically in different pathways of the brain and dispersed in different anatomical locations, we experience cognition and affect phenomenologically as distinct modes of consciousness. We feel hot cognitions, and we don't feel as much, we're thoughtful of cold cognitions. And so I think that we have to be cautious. I think we should push work on connections with neuroscience and cognitive science as far as we can push it. All I'm saying is, or cautioning against, is assuming that eventually we're going to be able to reduce ACT to individual psychology and individual psychology to neuroscience. I don't think that'll ever happen. Sorry I'm over 3 minutes, but that's because of all the materials that I have to cover.